Dark Cast Network. Out of the shadows comes the best of indie podcasts. The Monster of Florence is the name commonly used by the Italian media for a non-definitively identified serial killer active in the metropolitan area of Florence between 1968 and 1985. The monster, as he is known, murdered 16 victims, usually young couples secluded in search of intimacy in wooded areas during new moons. Several connected persons have been convicted for the involvement of the murders, yet the exact sequence of events and the identity of the main actor remain unclear. My name is DJ, and this is the Mythical True Crime Podcast. Hello, and welcome to tonight's show. Thank you very much for listening to tonight's podcast, a continuation with our Summer of Love series, where we talk about cases that take place on lovers' lanes. Tonight we'll be discussing the Monster of Florence, as it's known, and as our second episode for this series. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Consider liking and following, and also consider subscribing. Subscribing monetarily helps the show grow, so I can continue to bring you episodes. On the night of August 21st, 1968, mason worker Antonio Lobianco and his homemaker Barbara Loci were shot to death with a .22 caliber handgun in Signa, a small town west of Florence. The couple were attacked in their car while Loci's son, Nataliano, laid asleep in the back seat. He was 6 at the time. Upon waking up and finding his mother dead, the child fled in fright and reached a nearby house. Loci, a native to Sardinia, had been well known in the town, receiving the nickname Ape Regina, or Queen Bee. Her older husband, Stefano Mele, was eventually charged with the murder and spent 6 years in a prison. However, while he was imprisoned, another couple was murdered, apparently with the same gun. Several lovers of Loci's were suspected to be perpetrators of the crime. Even Stefano stated on several occasions that one of them had to have killed her, but no evidence was ever found. As for other murders, they were committed while he was in prison. In 1982, the murders of Lobianco and Loci were linked to more recent murders based on a tip from an anonymous writer who had possibly signed himself as a friendly citizen in the letters to the police. On July 20th, 1982, examining magistrate Vezino Tremocomi found 5 bullets and 5 shell casings, appropriately stored in a folder amongst the records of Mele's case file. Authorities were unable to reconstruct the chain of custody for those pieces of evidence and did not request a scientific comparison, even though it would have been necessary to check whether they matched the ballistic report of 1968 or not. As the spent cartridges had been fired from a gun using 4 similar crimes, the presence in the Mele's case file suggests that law enforcement officers that the perpetrator of to be more recent double murders were connected with them. On September 15, 1974, teenage sweethearts Pasquale Gentacor, a barman, and Stefania Pettini, an accountant, were shot and stabbed in the country lane near Borgo San Lorenzo while having sexual intercourse at the Fiat 127 address. They were not far from the notorious teen club, as it was known, where they were supposed to spend the evening with friends. Bettini's corpse had been violated with a grapevine stalk and disfigured with 97 stab wounds. Some hours before the murder, Pettini had disclosed to a friend that a weird man was terrifying her. Another friend of Pettini recalled that a strange man had followed and bothered the two of them during a driving lesson a few days before. Several couples of lovers who used to, quote, park in the same area were Genticore, and Bettini, and that's where they were murdered, and they stated that particular area had been frequented by voyeurs, a pair of them acting very oddly. Later, June 6, 1981, a warehouseman, Giovanni Foggi, was with a shop assistant, Carmela Denocchio, as they were shot and stabbed near Scandici, and they were an engaged couple where they had both lived. Denoccio's body was pulled out of the car, and the killer cut out her pubic area with a notched knife. The next morning, a young voyeur, paramedic Enzo Spitelli, spoke about the murder before the corpses had been discovered. He spent 3 months in jail and was eventually charged with murder before the perpetrator exonerated him by killing again. On October 23, 1981, workman Stefano Baldi and telephonist Susanna Cambri, who were also engaged, were shot and stabbed in a park in the vicinity of Calizzano. Cambri's pubic area was also cut out, just like Denuccio's. An anonymous caller phoned Cambri's mother the morning after the murder to, quote, talk to her about her daughter. A few days before the murder, Susanna had told her mother that someone was tormenting her and even chased her by a vehicle. Unfortunately, this takes us only halfway through the suspected victims of this killer. On June 19, 1982, mechanic Paolo Mainardi and dressmaker Antonella were shot to death after just having sex in Mainardi's car on the provincial road. This time the killer did not have time to mutilate the female victim, as the road was relatively busy. Several passing motorists had seen the car parked on the side of the road after its interior light had turned on. Mainardi was still alive when found, but died some hours later at the hospital due to serious injuries. Mainardi was believed to have heard or seen the killer approaching and attempted to drive away, only to lose control of his vehicle and drive into a ditch on the other side of the road. After reconstruction of the events suggests that after shooting the couple, the killer drove Mainardi's car for a few meters down just to hide the vehicle and the bodies in the woodland area nearby, only to lose control of the vehicle again and abandon it in a ditch, where it was discovered by a motorist only a few minutes later. September 9, 1983, Willem Frederick Horst Meyer and Jens Rusch, two students from West Germany, were visiting Italy to celebrate an important scholarship Meyer had just won. They were also found shot dead in their Volkswagen Samba bus in Galuzio. Rusch, long blonde hair and small build, could have deceived the killer into thinking it was a female. Police suspected that the students were gay lovers based on pornographic materials found at the scene. July 29, 1984, law student Claudio Stefanici and barmaid Pia Rotini were both shot and stabbed in Stefanicci's Fiat Panda parked in a woodland area near Vico. The killer had removed Rotini's pubic area and left breast this time. There were also reports of a strange man who had followed the couple at an ice cream parlor some hours before the murder. A close friend of Rotoni recalled that she had confided in her friend that she had been bothered by, quote, an unpleasant man while working at the bar. On the night of September 7th through 8th in 1985, Jean-Michel Kajvili, a musician of Georgian ancestry, and tradeswoman Nadina Maria, both from France, were shot and stabbed while sleeping in a small tent in a woodland area near the area they were staying, San Cascano. Gravelici was shot in a short distance away from the tent when they were trying to escape, but Marriott's body was mutilated. Because the killer had murdered two foreigners there was not yet a missing persons report. The killer sent a taunting note along with a piece of Marriott's breast to the state prosecutor, Silvia Della Monica, stating that the murder had taken place and challenging local authorities to find the victims. A person picking mushrooms in the area was the one who discovered the body a few hours later before the letter arrived to Della Monica's desk. Now, it wasn't until the Foggy Donaccio murders in 1981 that the police realized that these killings were connected. There was a newspaper article around the time in 1974 which caused the police to perform ballistics tests and confirm that that same gun had been used in both murders, based on the physical evidence they had. Reporter Mario Spenzi coined the moniker Monster of Florence. Now, after the 1982 murders, police leaked false information that Menardi had regained consciousness just before dying in the hospital. Soon after, an anonymous tip called for the police to relook at the Lobianco murder in 1968, and it was quickly determined that the same gun had been used. The confession and conviction of Loci's husband, Stefano Mele, was subsequently revisited, as Mele had been imprisoned during the later murders. Mele's statements in police interviews were inconsistent, shifting the blame from his Sardinian relatives and acquaintances. Now, Francisco Vinici was also arrested first. He was a former lover of Loci's, whose car had been found hidden on the day that the false Menardi information had been leaked. Francesco's was kept in custody for over a year, even during the 1983 murders. Examining magistrate Mario Rotella instead widened the net, arresting Mele's brother and his brother-in-law, Giovanni Mele and Piero. In 1984, when the murders occurred, the three suspects were all in custody, so police had no choice but to release them. Rotella focused on Francesco's brother, Salvatore, who was also another lover and former lodger of Barbara Loci's. Vinci's first wife had died in a fire in Sardinia, ruled a suicide, although rumors said that it was a murder. And after the final monster murder in 1985, Rotella arrested Vinici and charged him with the murder of his wife, intending to move from there to the other killings attributed to the monster. The trial in Sardinia instead acquitted Vinici, who walked free. By this point, Chief Prosecutor Pierre Vigna thought that the Sardinian trail was spent and wanted to look at other possibilities of the gun having been picked up by an unknown party after its use in the 1968 murders. In 1989, Rotella was forced to officially clear all the Sardinian suspects and withdrew them from the case. This line of investigation has become known to the Italian press and literature about this case as the Pista Sarda, or the Sardinian Trail. After this quick message, we'll be right back. Hello there, listeners. Whether you're new or you've been with me from the start, a great way to catch up and dive deeper into the world of mythical true crime is to check out my earlier shows. I've covered everything from Bigfoot to aliens and ghosts. Take a moment and browse through the past episodes, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means everything to me. With the use of computer analysis and anonymous tips, a new suspect, Pietro Pacciani, was found. Pacciani had been convicted of both rape and domestic abuse to his two daughters, and in 1951 murder of a man who had relations with his ex-girlfriend, for which he served 13 years in prison. Inspector Rogero first found incriminating evidence, such as similarities between the 1951 murder and the monster killings, as well as the reproduction of Primavera by Botticelli, and another painting that was also thought to be by Pacciani. The only physical evidence against Pacciani was an unfired bullet of the same brand as the monsters, found in Pacciani's garden at the end of a lengthy search, later discovered to be planted evidence by the police. Pacciani's was controversially convicted of the initial trial in 1994. At his appeal, the prosecutor took Pacciani's side, citing the lack of evidence and very poor police work. And as a result, Pacciani's was acquitted and released in 1996. The investigating officer's successor, Michel Guattari, tried to introduce new witnesses at the final hour, but was denied. A new trial for Pacciani was ordered by the Supreme Court, but he had died in 1998 before it could begin. Instead, two alleged accomplices were tried, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Latti. Vanni was witness to the Pacciani's trial, and he was famously claimed the two of them were merely, quote, snack buddies, a term that entered Italian vernaculum. Latti had been one of Guattari's surprise witnesses, claiming to have seen Pacciani and Vanni committed the 1985 murders. After many more sessions of questioning, he had begun to incriminate himself in the murders as well. Both were convicted and condemned to life imprisonment, though their sentences have been widely criticized, and many consider the murders to be unsolved. The sentences condemning the snack buddies were mainly based on much-discussed testimonies of Pucci and, of course, Latti, above all. This prevented the identification of a certain organic and global motive that was valid for all crimes. In fact, Latti, before mentioning the mysterious doctor, had changed his version several times for the reasons that Pacciani and Vanni had killed. Initially in 1996, Latti declared that, quote, the crimes were acts of anger due to sexual approaches that the victims would have rejected, end quote. Instead, a year later, he provided another version of the motive, stating that Pacciani's intention was to kill and then feed the fetishes to his daughters. Now, in 2001, Guattari, now the chief inspector of the police unit, GEADS, which is an investigative group of serial crimes, announced that the crimes were connected to a satanic cult allegedly active in the Florence area. In his testimony, Latti had spoken to a doctor who had hired Pacciani to commit the murders and collect the genitalia of the women for use in their rituals. Guattari justified his party on the discovery of a pyramidal stone near a via where Pacciani had been employed. The stone, Guattari suggested, was indicative of the cult activity. Critics, such as Spezzi, who had found the idea laughable, given such stones are common, used on doorsteps in the surrounding area. The via was searched and nothing was found. The acquaintances of Pacciani and Vanni during these years of the murders fueled the line of investigation into possible esoteric motives and rites linked to Satanism underlying the crimes. In particular, Pacciani and Vanni frequented Salvatore Indovino, a self-styled occultist and fortune-teller originally from Cantina, a farmhouse located on the countryside of San Cascano. According to local rumors, orgies and rites took place there. During the searches carried out by the state police in Pacciani's home, at least 3 books linked to black magic and Satanism were found. The so-called esoteric trial is also linked to large sums of money that Pacciani came into possession during the years of the crimes, which gave rise to the idea that, quote, snack buddies acted on behalf of personalities who remained unknown. The checks carried out by the state police highlighted that Pacciani, before the crimes attributed to the monster of Florence, was in modest economic conditions and did not inherit assets that could justify the sums of money considered, for the most part, out of league for a simple farmer like him. Mario Vanni, however, also came to be one of the important figures at his disposal, although much lower extent than those of Pacciani. Pacciani, being a modest farmer, even had 157 million lire in his disposal, which in 1996 would have been around 117,000 euros, and interest-bearing postal vouchers. as well as having purchased a vehicle, 2 houses, and completely renovated his home. Arguments against Pacini as the murderer hired by a mysterious unknown, instigators pointed out that the farmer, in addition to renting out an apartment, carried out many odd jobs, which was also known for his stinginess, as underlined by Giuseppe Azzarelli's book, The Legend of Vampa. Furthermore, the alleged accomplice Lottie was far from rich, given that in the 1980s and 90s he found odd jobs as well and accommodations only thanks to the help of the town priest, being that all effects a destitute unemployed person can have. Even Vanni, despite the figures found in his accounts, died a modest provincial retirement home. In 2010, Pier Luigi Vigna, former Florence prosecutor who dealt with the case, declared himself skeptical about the existence of a possible second level of instigators, demonstrating the fact that the investigations following those of the snack buddies have not had any developments. And as if this story didn't get strange enough, in 2017, Francesco Amicone, a freelance journalist, conducted an investigation on his own that led to find him to have a connection between the monster of Florence and the Zodiac killer cases. Amicone's inquiry was published in an Italian magazine called The Tempi, newspapers, and also his blog on his website since 2018. Amicone's suspect was Joseph, aka Giuseppe Bellivica, who had died in December 2022, a former ABMC superintendent at the Florence American Cemetery in Italy, who testified at the Pacini trial. In 2017, Amicone found that the Bellivica had a 20-year military career when he retired from the army to move to Florence in July 1974. Between May 26th and August 10th, Bellivica and Amicone had 7 meetings in circa 2 to 3 hours and was found by Florence ROS Cabrinelli in 2018. During a phone call on September 12th in 2017, Bellivica implied that his responsibility in both the Monster of Florence and the Zodiac cases, agreeing that the Amicone's request to turn himself in. However, Bellivica later changed his mind. The conversation, to note, listeners, was not recorded. During the meetings, however, in 2017, Bellivica told Amicone, and this is all through word of mouth, that he was an undercover CID investigator operating in California, United States at the time of Zodiac activities in 1968 and 1970, and participated in the CID inquiry of the so-called Khaki Mafia, which involved SMA William Woolbridge, an Army sergeant, and firms from Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay areas, as well as Reno, Nevada. Following a complaint against Bellivica by Amicone, which was dated on March 1st, 2018, the journalist's first news articles on the monster Zodiac connection were published by the Tempi. Bellivica denied any admission of guilt and filed a lawsuit, and despite this, Amicone did not stop accusing him. Amicone says that Bellivica might have had access to the case file of a double murder near Florence in 1968, where the bullets and shells casings had been improperly stored, and that Bellivica's replaced the pieces of evidence with spent cartridges by a gun that he would have used in the monster's homicides in order to link his future crimes to those murders for which he had an alibi. Italian authorities collected Bellivica's DNA in late 2020. And in 1968, Bellivica was in Vietnam. But according to Amicone, they could have had access to Stefano Mele's trial file, where bullets and shell casings of the Sigma murder were improperly stored, and switched them to attribute the crime to himself. This hypothetical mislead could have taken place in the early 70s, while Bellivica was serving time in Italy at Camp Darby. In this regard, in 2021, Amicone attached to an edition that the complaint against Bellivica, a report containing 21 interviews with ballistic experts and the results of a test at the range. And according to Amicone, the report would also show that the bullet casings from the monster's gun were also found in the melee file, but they did not have the same as in the 1968 murder, providing the reconstruction of the possible mislead. Later in 2021, Florence Assistant Attorney Luca Turco's request the investigation into Bellavica's result from Amicone's inquiry was dismissed, and the journalist was charged with defamation due to the complaint by Bellavica. And as I mentioned earlier, when Bellavica's DNA was tested by Italian authorities in late 2020, in November 2023, his DNA profile was sent by Amicone to the authorities that investigate the Zodiac case, according to the journalist. Now, this story was also featured in the 2001 film adaptation of the 1999 novel Hannibal. In it, Thomas Harris visits Florence and attends Pacini's trial while researching the book. In the novel, however, supporting antagonist Inspector Pazzi was professionally disgraced when he arrested the wrong man for the Monstro murders. In scenes that were cut from the film before its release, a janitor of the Palazzo Vinicio, who witnesses Hannibal Lecter murdering Chief Inspector Pazzi before fleeing the city, is revealed to be the Monster of Venice. Although the subplot involving Il Monstro was removed entirely from the completed film, however, the deleted scenes are included with an extra feature on the DVD. Third season of the television series also implied that Hannibal himself was Il Monstro as well. And that concludes our episode tonight. I sure hope you're enjoying the Summer of Love series. Soon we're going to finish up the Summer of Love series with the very famous case, Son of Sam, which took place in the summer 1976 all the way to the next summer, July 1977. And that concludes another captivating episode, delving into the world of mythical true crime. I appreciate you joining me tonight as we listen to the facts from these true crime tales. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll uncover even more mysteries. Until then, thank you for listening to tonight's episode. Good night.